For the first time this season, the Saints have won back-to-back games. They beat the Cleveland Browns in maybe the messiest game that we'll see in a long time. They improved their record to 6-9. And hey, with two more games left, they're technically alive in the playoffs. So let's get into all that on the Straight Up.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
Once again, guys, the Straight Up Saints podcast is presented by Birdsall Law, the official injury lawyers of Boot Crew Media, located at 918 Poydras Street by the Superdome. You could give them a call at 504-523-5413. The Saints came into this game, and we all said it had to be a Taysom Hill, Alvin Kamara game, run the football. And it didn't start off like that. It actually started off in a manner where, if we're going to be completely honest with each other, a lot of us were frustrated. I know I was frustrated for sure because the Saints were kind of adamant about throwing the football. In the beginning of the first quarter, they had 8 pass attempts. Andy Dalton had an early interception. David Johnson was getting key touches on third down. And you kind of sit there and you're going, okay, what the hell is going on? Like, why are the Saints so adamant about throwing the football in a game where, with the wind chill, it was minus 27? That just made no sense to me. And finally, logic prevailed in the second quarter and then through the rest of the game, with the Saints leaning on Taysom Hill, leaning on Alvin Kamara, and surprise, surprise, when you give your two best playmakers the rock and let them run the football at a consistent clip in frigid conditions, you get the win. So this could be a day where I could go on a rant about why the Saints weren't using certain players early. And honestly, I would have loved to, but I'm not going to, because I do think when it was the second and third, the fourth quarters, the Saints did what they had to do. They let their playmakers kind of carry them home. And you look at what Taysom Hill did in this game in terms of efficiency. I'll pull up the numbers right here. I thought number 7 did a great job in terms of yards per carry. He finished the game with 9 carries for 56 yards and a touchdown. He was obviously doing his thing. My player of the game was Alvin Kamara, though, and I'll tell you a couple reasons why. For starters, these are the type of games, right, where you don't know if Alvin's going to necessarily shine, because when you think of cold weather games, you kind of think of those bruiser running backs, those big style guys, and that isn't necessarily Alvin Kamara. But when I tell you Alvin Kamara had a gutsy performance today, 20 carries for 76 yards. He also had 34 receiving yards, had a really big catch in the second half to keep a drive going, keep the Browns off the field. Alvin Kamara was the player of the game for this one. I thought he was great, did a good job of just keeping those legs moving, keeping the chains moving. And I got to give it to him, man. It's so easy for players at this stage in the season where you kind of feel like your playoff hopes are dimming to kind of just check out. And he didn't do that one bit. He continues to play hard. And I was really happy with the way Alvin Kamara played today. I was pleased with that performance. Absolutely. Now, I mentioned Taysom Hill. I give some love to the defensive side of the football. Like, I just need to give some love to the defensive side of the football for so many reasons. But let's start off with the obvious here. Alontae Taylor, the rookie cornerback out of Tennessee. See some of you guys mentioning him. He's something. He's one of those players where, look, that big interception hasn't come yet, right? That game-changing play, although Lord knows he is on the cusp of making it happen. You look at that fourth quarter, Deshaun Watson converts not one, but 2 third and longs on the drive. They get into the red zone. You're thinking, oh boy, are they going to give up a touchdown to tie the game? And then worse, give up the 2-point conversion that seals the deal? That's what I started thinking. It was going through the back of my mind. I'm sure it went through the back of some other Saints fans' minds. It didn't happen, though. It didn't. And it's because of Alontae Taylor. Because Deshaun Watson finds Donovan Peoples-Jones open in the backhand corner, left side of the end zone. And Alontae Taylor comes out of nowhere, cool, calm, collected, and makes the play that he needed to make in order to make sure they keep that win. They hold on to the lead. So that was just a fantastic play by Alontae Taylor. He just doesn't look like a rookie at times. I know he makes mistakes. His tackling can be better. You're still waiting for him to seal the deal on the big play, which is something I mentioned just a minute ago. But when I talk about being composed, when the game is essentially on the line and you make that type of play, shout out to number 27. He's been outstanding, and he's the type of player that, although this has been a tough season, you start to think about what this team can be in a couple years down the line, where they can get better. He's played so well that we aren't talking about Marshall Lattimore's absence as much as we probably should. Like, he has been such a standout corner. Wanted to give Alontae Taylor some props here on the show. Now, I also want to give some props to other players that you probably didn't anticipate playing a lot of snaps today, but they ended up playing their ass off. And those two players, in my opinion, have to be one. Daniel Sorensen had a key interception and return. But let's also give some credit to Chase Hansen, the linebacker, who without Pete Werner, he was called to step in, and I thought he did a really good job. And I also thought Tyrann Mathieu had some good moments as well. Overall, if you're looking for a kind of glimmer of hope, not just for the rest of the season with 2 games left, but also for future years, because let's say you're assuming that Dennis Allen comes back. Whether or not we all like it, that's not our decision to make. But let's say he is coming back. The last 4 weeks, the Saints defense has really hit their stride. Now, some people don't want to hear it, right? Because some people are already eager to get to the offseason, eager to see changes. And look, the Saints might make changes. But if you're looking for a glimmer of hope in the area where you're like, okay, I know Dennis Allen's coming back, but this is why I have confidence in next year's team. Let's just say you start to look around. The defense is doing what we wanted the defense to do under a defensive-minded head coach, which is really start to stifle offenses. Over the last 4 weeks, the Saints have held the Browns to 10 points. The Saints have held the Falcons to 18 points. They've held the Buccaneers to 17 points and the 49ers to 13 points. Now, you might come back with a counter argument that those aren't great offenses that they played. Only one of them is a great offense, the 49ers. But my argument would be, look, it's the NFL, right? People score at any given moment, at any given clip. And when you can go 4 straight weeks with giving up 18 points or less in each of those games, you deserve some credit. And I think what's fair is fair. When you rip someone for mistakes, you also got to give them the benefit of the doubt when they do the right thing. And Lord knows that I have been critical. So I want to give props to the defense under Dennis Allen and what they've done the last 4 games. Those are great performances. Now, doesn't mean I'm not frustrated because, man, I got some things that I want to say in terms of frustration. And what I want to say is when you look around the NFC South, Panthers lingering around, obviously the Buccaneers still linger around. Over the last 2 weeks, these 2 wins that the Saints have gotten have just magnified how frustrating that Monday Night Football loss was to the Buccaneers. Because had the Saints won that game, like they should have, you'd be talking about a 3-game win streak, but you also be talking about the fact that as miserable as this Saints season has been, they would be the number 1 team in the NFC South, which means they would get a home playoff game against the Dallas Cowboys, which means as bad as this season has been, as frustrating as it has been for all of us, as much as I've yelled throughout this season about things that didn't go their way, there would be no better consolation prize than seeing the Saints sneak into the playoffs and potentially knocking off the Cowboys. That would be kind of the cherry on top, because not only would you beat Dallas, you would make them so desperate they would have to give you the Godfather offer for Sean Payton the following offseason. So that's kind of like where I'm frustrated as to, that's where that loss really stings, because this team, honestly, you look around, over the last 3 weeks, they've been playing the best football out of any team in the NFC South. It's just coming down to they just didn't seal the deal in Tampa, and now they're kind of paying for it. And look, maybe the Saints win out. I still have my doubts, but they are playing better football, and I think that's an important thing to say. Now, what I do want to get to before I kind of just open it up to anyone having comments or such, or even just shortening it, because I know it's Christmas Eve and people got better things to do than listen to me rant about the Saints. What I will say is, if the Saints are going to keep Dennis Allen for another year, let's just go under that assumption. They need to get better quarterback play, because Andy Dalton's a fine quarterback. I didn't see today as Andy would have cost them. I actually think it was quite the contrary. The interception he threw wasn't technically his fault. And look, there were plays to Keith Kirkwood that should have been had, and they weren't. So I'm not going to get on Andy Dalton's case today, but the Saints need a better quarterback. That is a no-brainer. But more importantly, and what I really want to harp down on, is that the Saints need a new offensive play caller. Pete Carmichael has been a well-respected guy for years. No one's knocking his resume. And I get that he's done some really good things in New Orleans. But we've reached the point with Pete Carmichael that it's just, there's too many inconsistencies, and there's too many blatant things that should happen over the course of the game that don't happen. For example, why did it take until midway through the second quarter to use Taysom Hill in a game that was so obviously suited for his skill set? That confuses me. And if that was a case where, it was a rare occurrence, I would get off of Pete Carmichael's back. But unfortunately, it's happened a lot of times. Think about how many times this season we've seen the Saints not utilize Alvin Kamara on third down, not utilize Taysom Hill in the red zone, not go to their best playmakers in money downs, and instead dial up plays for guys like Kevin White and guys like Keith Kirkwood. And again, no disrespect to those 2 names. It's just, for me, Pete Carmichael's play calling throughout this season has been questionable. There are times where they move the ball very efficiently, and I'm very excited about that. And then they go right back to things that really boggle your mind and just frustrate you. And for those reasons, and for the fact that I think the Saints would benefit greatly from a schematical change and just kind of a breath of fresh air, that is why I would like to see Pete Carmichael off the staff after this year. And I know people are going to talk about, whether or not this win saves DA's job. I said earlier this week, I think DA is coming back. It's not my decision. I have made it very clear that I think the Saints would really, really benefit from just kind of restarting this thing and getting a new head coach with a roster that I think is still pretty talented, way more talented than people think. But I think he's going to come back. And I think the Saints were looking for reasons to not fire DA. And the fact that I think they're going to finish this season 7-10, I think that might be enough for him to save his job. I'm not saying it should, but I'm saying he will probably win 3 out of his last 4 games, maybe even all 4. And the Saints will say, hey, let's just keep him. And you know what? It is what it is. But if you're going to keep him, that's why I go back to this Pete Carmichael thing. Because if you keep DA, you got to get a new play caller in there and see if Dennis Allen can find a guy that can lead his offense. Because if DA's ever going to make it work as a head coach, ever, and he has not done it in 3 seasons, 3.25 seasons, I should say, he needs to get a great play caller with him. You know why we're all excited about the Lions and Dan Campbell, what he's done? Ben Johnson's been his guy. And look, the downside would be, if you get a great play caller as a defensive-minded coach, you probably lose them in the offseason to someone better, to a better job. Sure, but at least you have that experience, and at least you get on the winning track, and you start to show that you can evaluate coaches. And I think that's where I'm at right now. I would like to see the Saints start clean. I don't expect them to start clean, but the bare minimum they can do this offseason is get a new play caller in the building and see what you can do, because this offense, like I said, you still have Chris Olave, you still have Rashid Shaheed, you still have Taysom Hill. Lord knows what happens with Michael Thomas. You still have Alvin Kamara, but more importantly, you will get assets back this year. And I think the Saints, whether it's through the draft, whether through free agency, I think they will upgrade at running back. I think they will bring in another receiver, and you'll have weapons to play with. And I would like to see how a different offensive coordinator would get that done. So that's where I'm at right now. And when I look at the grand scheme of this game, I was thrilled with the way that Kamara and Taysom Hill played. I have been pleased with the way the defense has played the last 4 weeks, because you got to throw in the fact that Pete Werner hasn't been playing and Marshawn Lattimore hasn't played since October 9th. I think that's good. So I think that for me, that's pretty important. And, I look at another thing for this game. I think the Saints outside the first quarter really did a good job. And I see you guys mentioning in the comments section, did a really good job of avoiding the stupid plays. And I think for the Saints, it's been something that's kind of plagued them this year, right? When you think about costly penalties, pre-snap penalties, when Mark Ingram went out of bounds before the first down marker, even, throwing on the very next play on a 3rd and 1, the Saints have been victims of just getting too cute. And I think today they finally, after the first quarter, didn't get cute. They just said, hey, we are a defensive, run the football type of team, which honestly is their MO at this point in the year. And I'm glad that they stuck with it. And guess what? The result paid off. If the Saints were to lose today's game, I think this is one of those performances where, I'm going to be irate, but, it's almost like a sense of, okay, like they just will never get it. And you know what? I saw adjustments today. And again, I'm not going to change my opinion of DA and the rest of the staff. I think they need to be better. And I don't know if they can be better. I just know they have to be better. But they made changes today. And I'm not going to sit here on Christmas Eve freaking out about things that they did or didn't do, because as you guys mentioned, and Troy just mentioned in the chat, this is a team that really didn't have a lot of penalties today. And if we're being honest, the penalty that was called was on Paulson Adebo late. I didn't love that penalty. I kind of thought it was a bailout call for the Browns on a 3rd and 13 when this game is essentially over and they're trying to just throw their way down the field in a game that wasn't suited for those type of conditions. I didn't love that call. So, I think this was a good job of them being disciplined. They played clean football. And I think these are things that we should talk about. And you guys talk about them, almost playing a complete game. Had they had a better first quarter, this would have been their definition of a complete game. When the offense needed to get drives going at the end of the first half and at the start of the second half, they did that. And when the defense needed to close the door and say goodnight, they did that to the Browns as well. So this is as close we were going to get to one. And then you trickle in the fact that Will Lutz had a field goal in this game. And obviously field goals were not easy to come by in a game of this magnitude. And then also put into account that I thought Blake Gillikin was fine. I think there was one punt in this game that Blake Gillikin would like back. And I still have my concerns about the way he's been punting in fourth quarters, but there were moments where he pinned the Browns back. The Saints rarely lost the field position battle. And when they did, it was because of that interception in the first quarter. That's where it kind of flipped. But outside of that, the Saints did a really good job of kind of making sure that they were where they wanted to be when they were starting their drives. And again, that comes down to game planning and making sure you execute that part of the game. So look, this has not been the most fun season when it comes to covering the Saints. There have been times where I wanted to just pull my hair out of my head. But at the end of the day, like, there are 4 games left, and people can ask for misery so they can fire the coaches. But how miserable would you be if they did lose the last 4 games of the season without having their first round pick? And then on top of it, to make matters worse, the Saints don't fire DA. Like, I think that, and I think that was a very real possibility. So for me, there were 4 games left 2 weeks ago. They've won the first 2 of those 4. They got 2 left against an Eagles team that will probably be without Jalen Hurts. And then a Panthers team that, if they win the Eagles game, that Panthers-Saints game might actually be for the division, which is pretty wild if you ask me. So I'm very curious to see how the next 2 weeks go. But all I know is the Saints don't own their first round pick. And for those reasons alone, you should want them to win football games, because there would be nothing more humiliating than the Eagles stepping up to the podium with a 14-3 or a 15-2 record and the number 3 pick. I think that would be one of the most insulting things we have seen in recent NFL memory. So again, you're rooting for wins. And look, if they win these final 2 games, they have the Eagles, like I said, most likely without Jalen Hurts, and then they have the Panthers at home. 8-9 might win the division. And again, I'm not trying to flip my script on the Saints. I'm not. I've been very clear. I've been so frustrated this season because there is enough talent on this team, and there were enough opportunities for them to win games, such as the Bengals game, such as the Bucs game. You can even throw in the 49ers game where they got shut out there. There were moments to be had, and they squandered every single one. So it is kind of insulting that they're getting kind of like a 4th crack at this now. But look, the division's still open. We'll see what happens on Sunday between the Cardinals and Bucs. And if the Cardinals beat the Bucs, and I don't expect them to, but let's say the Cardinals do beat the Bucs with their 3rd-string quarterback in Trace McSorley, all bets are off. Whether you like it or not, all bets are off for this division. It just is. Like, that's how bad this year has been. You know? Now the Bucs would have games against the Panthers and Falcons to end it, and those are more favorable than Eagles and Panthers, which is what the Saints have. But at the end of the day, you're asking for your team to play meaningful football games at the end of the year, and these might be the ugliest meaningful football games you will ever watch at the end of a season. They probably will be. But until now, they're technically meaningful, whether we like it or not. And again, I'm not going to carry anyone's water. I am not going to sit here and say certain coaches deserve a second chance, because I don't think that's the way the NFL works, and it shouldn't work that way. But they're where they're at. So you might as well go do the damn thing and beat the Eagles without Jalen Hurts, if that's the case, and then go ahead and beat the Panthers the next week. If you're going to go in and go do this thing. So that's kind of, look, that's where my mentality is going to be at. I still have my reservations about this team. I still think there's a lot of bad things they do. I think they do a bad job of slamming the door shut when they can. Thankfully, they were able today, but the last 2 weeks they struggled with that. I think that this offense severely lacks creativity and also lacks the ability to just sustain momentum early in games. That's a big issue. But a lot of talent wasn't playing today. No Pete Werner, no Marshawn Lattimore, no Chris Olave. It's tough. No Cesar Ruiz. So they've been missing a lot of key guys. I still want to feel good about the roster. I have my doubts about the coaching staff. But when you watch a game like today, and I mentioned guys like Kamara, guys like Taysom Hill, guys like Alontae Taylor, when they start stepping up, guys like Rashid Shaheed, who I think just continue to just kind of climb the mountain, I just still feel like there's talent here. And that's why I'm just not ready to say rebuild everything. You want to say get rid of certain coaches? Let's do this thing. Like, I think they can retool. I am just not ready to just completely rebuild the whole roster, because I think rebuilding the roster and kind of nuking everything that you have, I think that could be a dangerous thing, because you don't know when you're going to get certain guys like that in the building again. And I think the Saints have a decent amount of talent at certain positions. Now, they got to get better at the defensive line. They got to absolutely get younger at safety. And those are things you hope they do in the offseason. But they got young talent at receiver. They got young talent on the O-line. They got young talent at tight end. They got young talent at cornerback. There are things that they are way ahead of compared to other teams. And by other teams, I mean when you look at the bottom of the barrel, like a team like the Texans, a team like the Bears, they are ahead in those regards. So that's where I'm at. Now, See someone asking, did Daniel Sorensen save DA's job? I don't think today's game is what saves DA's job, because I think the Saints would have had a hard time kind of judging him on a game in terrible weather. Whether or not that's fair, I don't think so. I think he should get judged because it's his job to have his guys ready. But I do think that the last 4 weeks of the season were always going to be the determining factor for one reason. Did the Saints quit on their coach? They haven't over the last 2 games. And technically, the Eagles game matters, which means I find it hard to believe that they're going to quit in that game. So, till at least the season finale, DA's guys are going to be playing hard, and I think that is what's going to benefit him more than anything. Not was it the Sorensen pick? Was it the Taysom Hill drive? Was it the Alvin Kamara catch late in the second half? I don't think it was any of those things. I just think it's a fact that his guys have played when it was very hard and probably easy to quit, especially after the Bucs lost. I think that's where the Saints find it. Now, I think this team still needs some type of injection of emotion, but there's something there that makes these guys still want to play. Maybe it's a pride thing. I don't know what it is, but they're still playing hard. And again, I still think that matters way more than people want to admit. Way more. So that's where I'm at there. Now, gone through about 20 minutes of ranting. I know it's Christmas Eve. You guys have things to do. So what we will do is, you guys have comments, you throw them in the chat. I will bring them up, and then we'll kind of go from there. We'll make it kind of short and sweet. And obviously I don't want to hold you guys long, but the fact that they did win makes it a little bit easier of a weekend, right? You guys have Christmas, you're spending time with the family, and then bringing up the Saints. You can at least joke around and be like, hey, the Saints are on a 2-game winning streak. Not the most impressive of winning streaks, but it's a winning streak, and it's their first one of the year, which is crazy to say. So I'm going to read this comment from Troy. He said, we're lacking consistent catching. Yeah, the Saints are, right? The Saints are. And I think for them, part of it is the bottom of the barrel of the depth chart, right? Because you came in with Michael Thomas, Jarvis Landry, Chris Olave being your 1 through 3. All 3 were inactive today. Now, 2 of them are never coming back, in my opinion. I don't think Jarvis Landry plays another game for the Saints, and I also don't think Michael Thomas plays another game for the Saints. Chris Olave, maybe he's back next week. If he is, that would be great for them. It's a hamstring injury, I think it was. This definitely was not the game to play with a hamstring injury, and that cold, you don't want that thing to get all tight and then end up pulling it even worse. So, good thing he didn't play. But I do agree, outside of Rashid Shaheed and a little bit of Juwan Johnson, Juwan Johnson today technically bobbled the pass that was intercepted. I think outside of those 2, the Saints really haven't had consistent catchers out of the backfield or even at receiver. You like to see AK a little bit more involved. You saw the big play he had in the pass game. You're like, why don't you do that more? And maybe hopefully that happens for the next 2 games. But I do agree, they are lacking consistent catching, which is weird. Shouldn't have to be a thing, but it is, and it's pretty unfortunate. Next comment here. Marcus Davenport was non-existent today. If I'm going to be truthful with you guys, I think this Marcus Davenport season has been so frustrating because Davenport, by the way, is the type of guy that you had questions about whether or not he was going to get paid. And I think if he had a really good season this year, you guys might have been like, whoa, that much money? I think he probably would have got a 4-year, $100 million deal, something of that magnitude, right? Something of $25 million per year. But Marcus Davenport this year has half a sack. He had 9 last year. He only played in 11 games last year. He's already played in more games this year. I think it's a fun discussion to have because I think for the Saints, it comes down to, he's on your books next year. What is the interest around the league? If other teams are interested in Marcus Davenport, I think it makes it a lot easier to kind of just let him go. But if the interest isn't crazy and you're looking around and you need to keep this defensive line as probably talented as possible, I do think that, all right, you think about it, because he's on your cap next year either way, whether you like it or not, he's on the payroll. So you probably offer something. It's not going to be as steep as you thought because he has had a disappointing season, but I'm sure the Saints will probably make an offer. But I think the Saints got to get more speed on their defensive line. I've been a big proponent of that. I think they're way too much on these power rushers, these 6'7" defensive ends that shined at the Senior Bowl. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. And I would like to see them change it up a little bit. Now, this is an interesting comment here. Report is Zach Wilson will be available after the season. Might he be worth a look? I'm going to say no, and I'll tell you why. I think that the Saints are going to make a quarterback change. I think the Saints need to make a quarterback change where they get a veteran. If they're going to make a quarterback change and stick with this roster, they're going to need a vet in there. And as someone who is from New York, all day I hear about Zach Wilson, all day long. And the thing about Zach Wilson, forget about the personality thing and whether or not he's a good leader and his teammates not liking him. I think some of that is overblown. I do think he seems kind of entitled and you know what? He'll learn from that. But the problem with Zach Wilson is he doesn't see the field. The game it doesn't process well for him. Everything's happening so fast. And I'm looking at him playing every game and the awareness is off. The ability to hit the layups is off. And the arm talent is there. The mobility is there. The youth is there. But do you trust the Saints to get all those, problems solved in New Orleans? I don't. Maybe if Sean Payton was here, I would say give it a damn shot because Sean Payton is one of the best offensive minds of this generation. But with DA, with Pete Carmichael, I don't trust that staff to take in Zach Wilson and get the best out of him. So there are a lot of quarterbacks I'm going to link to the Saints this upcoming offseason. Spoiler alert, some are going to be trade options. Some are going to be free agent options. Zach Wilson won't be one of them. It's an awesome question. I think it's a very fun hypothetical to talk about. But I do think that Zach Wilson, the things that he struggles with, I don't think the Saints are going to be able to fix in him. And if he's going to reach that ceiling, and Lord knows it's pretty high, it's not going to be in New Orleans with DA. That's just kind of where I'm at. This is a good comment here. Dennis Allen, 2 wins in a row, coach of the year. I've seen enough. I love the sarcasm. That's what's going to get us through it, man. Like, got to be able to joke around a little bit. I'm glad that you're having fun there because you got to. Saints are peaking at the right time. Also, Adebo has regressed. Not sure what all the hype was about in training camp. Taylor is cornerback too. Now, the hype was actually warranted in training camp. I can tell you that for sure. I whether it was the videos, whether it was from people I was talking about, everyone said Adebo was that good. And he got hurt. It was the ankle early. That thing stayed taped through November. Hurt his knee as well. Actually started to really play well for about a 2 to 3 week stretch. You think about the Niners game, I thought he played excellent in. Played well in the Rams game. The Bucs game, he had that PI. Kind of cost them. And now he's reverting back to his old habits. And it's frustrating. I agree. I think Alontae Taylor is cornerback 2 right now. But I'm not ready to just say Adebo's done because I do think that Adebo is a young cornerback with a lot of talent. I think the Saints can figure it out. And I hope that they do with him because he was an exciting rookie. But for now, I do agree. Adebo would be cornerback 3 at the moment with the way that he's played. 2 questions here. Can the Bucs lose versus the Cardinals? And can the Saints win against the Eagles? Okay, so let's start with the first one. Can the Bucs lose the Cardinals? Yes. Do I expect them to? No, because the Cardinals have been one of the only teams that have actually been worse than the Bucs over the last couple of weeks. Just looking lifeless, whether it's against the Patriots, whether it's against the Niners, whether it's against the Rams. So they look lifeless, man. Like they look lifeless out there. And they've reached that point in the season where every other day it's a splash report about whether or not Cliff Kingsbury is going to stay as their head coach. So yeah, I'm very skeptical of the Cardinals beating the Bucs on Christmas night. But it is possible. As for the Saints beating the Eagles, look, if you want the Saints to beat the Eagles, you better hope the Eagles beat the Cowboys today, because if the Eagles beat the Cowboys today, they would be more inclined to rest Jalen Hurts because they'd have the division locked up. They would have the number 1 seed in the NFC locked up. And if they play Hurts, you could play him in the final week of the season, resting your guys, get him out there, knock some rust off. But if they lose to the Cowboys and all of a sudden things start creeping in, you're like, all right, let's just finish this off now. And I'm going to make this very clear, and I know you guys know this. The Saints cannot stop Jalen Hurts. Couldn't stop him 2 years ago. Didn't stop him last year. And I promise you, if he faces them this year, they're not going to stop him this year either. So, yeah. Better hope the Eagles win today with Minshew against the Cowboys, because if they do, then I think Jalen Hurts sits against the Saints. And if Jalen Hurts sits against the Saints, that's good news for the Saints, because they got a better chance of beating Gardner Minshew than they got of beating Jalen Hurts. So that's kind of it. Jumping for joy when Kamara finally got a touchdown. Yep. Isn't that crazy, by the way? This is the second game of the NFL season that Alvin Kamara's had a touchdown in. Sad. It's frustrating. It's all of the above, but glad he got in. I mean, got to get him going at some point. We need the Bucs to lose 2 of their last 3 games. They face a 3rd-string quarterback tomorrow. Yeah, it's tough, right? It's not, like I said, their schedule really is easy. You got the Cardinals with Trace McSorley, Desmond Ridder and the Falcons, and the Panthers next week. Now, the Panthers one is probably the toughest one. The Panthers are playing some really, really good football. But that's a 3-game stretch that is about as easy as it gets. And I do think that as bad as the Bucs have been, at some point they got to win one of those games, right? It'll probably start tomorrow. That would be my guess. Now, if the Bucs lose tomorrow, then I'm going to take back the whole thing about their path is so easy, because you know what? When you start playing football that poorly, and let's say you lose to Trace McSorley-led Cardinals, you cannot be guaranteed to win a game. You just can't. There's no gimme games on your schedule. But I do agree. They have a very easy path. It's hard to find a way where the Bucs don't win this division just because their road to the playoffs is so easy. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. I think Alontae Taylor's cornerback too, and not to knock Adebo. I think we we can look at him as a piece for much needed draft comp. Look, I would still keep Adebo. I think the best thing for the Saints would be going into next year with Lattimore, Adebo, and Taylor. Obviously Alontae being the number 2 though, and Adebo being the 3, because as we've seen this year, guys get hurt. And I don't know about you guys, but if one of those two gets hurt and Adebo's got to play next year, I would feel better about playing Adebo than I would about playing some unknown. And if you bring Adebo back, the Saints don't have to worry really about investing a lot into the outside cornerback position. That would be a pro, in my opinion. So I would bring him back. Look, if you can get something for him, that would be great, but I just don't think the market's going to be that high for a guy who was better as a rookie than as a sophomore. But I do think, though, that it's been a frustrating season, but I think that I'm not ready to quit on him yet. Let's see what he does next year and if he could be healthy going into the season, which he wasn't this year. Another comment here. This is about Trevor Penning. Trevor Penning was mauling people that make that man the starter. I would like to see it already. I mean, you got 2 games left, and I think for all purposes here, wouldn't you like to see what he could do in a starting role before next season? I mean, he was out there having fun today, and I think at some point in these next 2 games, I would like to see him in a actual prominent role. Maybe it's next week. We'll see what it is, but I do agree with that. Let's say the Saints can't win the South. What is their path to a wild card? Well, I mean, their path to a wild card is simple as it is complicated. Saints would need to win out. They would need to make sure that the Packers don't get to 8 wins. They would need to make sure that the Washington Commanders lose out. They would need to make sure that the Detroit Lions lose out. And they would need to make sure that the Seattle Seahawks lose out. Some of those are feasible. Lions is possible. Seahawks is possible. Commanders is maybe possible. But again, the Saints would need to win out. It's like you would need so many teams to start losing out while also needing the Saints to win out. It's a lot. So the road really is, if they're going to make the playoffs, is winning the worst division in the league and going from there. I'm one of the few fans that has accepted the fact that Dennis Allen is probably coaching next year, so we really need to hit on a QB, D-line, and RB2. Yep, look, I think the faster people admit that DA's probably the coach next year, the more at peace you'll be with things, because you won't sit here banging on a drum saying, I want this guy as my coach. I want that guy as my coach. Look, I would love all that. I would love all that. I'd love this. I'd love Marvel to make an amazing Spider-Man 3. I'd like a lot of things, guys. They don't happen, though. So I think for me, it is what it is. So go get yourself a better quarterback. Go invest in the running back position like you just said, which is a great point. Go get some youth on the D-line and give it another shot, because guess what, guys? The division's going to be bad again next year. Panthers have no QB. Bucs are going to lose Tom Brady, and the Falcons have no QB. It's going to be wide the hell open. You're going to get one more shot to go for it and one more chance to figure out if Dennis Allen is any good. Right now, the answer is no. But we'll see. It's just the faster you admit it, the better off for your health. And by the way, I talked about the Eagles needing to beat the Cowboys. The Eagles are now up 10-0 because Dak just threw a pretty bad pick 6. Great play by the defensive player. But little update there for you guys, because I think if the Eagles win, then Jalen Hurts won't play next week. But that's just where I'm at. Finally got 2 wins in a row. Yep. Took the Saints long enough, right? Wait until week 16, but better late than never. Hate how it took them a quarter and a half to do what we knew they needed to do. Also sad we blew the lead against the Bucs, because now look. Yep, it's frustrating. This should be a game where if the Saints won today and they didn't blow that Bucs game, all of a sudden we're like, hey, this has been a bad season, but they could steal a playoff spot. Now it's like you're going to need some help. But like I said, you're going to play meaningful football games at least going into next week. That's kind of all you could ask at this point with the way this year's gone. With Sean Payton possibly coming back at the Rams next year, let's play the if game. Could we lose some of our players to LA? I don't know. I'm sure Sean would make a call about certain guys that maybe the Saints would want to get off the book, but the only real guy that I think would be interesting to him is Taysom Hill. And I don't know if the Saints would want to get rid of Taysom Hill. Taysom Hill is a big part of what the Saints do. And I think as the season's gone on, especially over the last couple of games, they're starting to find ways to get him a little bit more incorporated. And I don't know if they're ready to get rid of him. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. They're going to need Taysom Hill to be a big part of the offense next year because the Saints won't have a franchise quarterback. They just won't. It'll probably be a trade for a player who is promising but not proven, or a vet like an Andy Dalton, like a Jimmy Garoppolo, like a Tyler Huntley, whoever the hell it might be. That's probably where it would go down to. So I don't think he would. Now, does he start poaching coaches? That's a possibility. It's a possibility for sure. The more we lose, the more I feel like it increases the chances we get Sean back. So I'm hoping we lose. Guys, I think it's on the table. I just don't see Sean coming back. I'd love to be wrong. I have my doubts. But I love the optimism, though. Can't wait to see Brady get his behind kicked in the playoffs if that's how it shakes out. As much as we'd like to say that, if the Bucs played the Cowboys in the playoffs and the Cowboys are perennial choke artists, I'm not ready to be like, oh, the Bucs are going to get blown out because, man, I don't know, man. I don't know. I really don't know. Well, I would keep a Debo just so we never have to play Chris Harris again. Yep. That's a good point. No disrespect, Chris Harris. He's had a heck of a career, but it's about that time to go be a family man, if we're being quite honest. Maybe even sign CJ Gardner-Johnson free agency. I don't think CJ would come back. To this point, it's just tough to see him put him back on a Saints jersey. It wasn't a great ending. And I think when you do have sour grapes and things end on rocky terms, it's kind of hard to say, okay, let's run this thing back. I just don't see it. I'd like to, I just don't. Gibbs out of Bama would be a heck of a replacement if we want to talk about packaging Kamara in a mid-round pick to jump into the late first to get a QB. I still think Kamara's on this team next year because of his leadership and the fact that, look, this has been a really frustrating season for Kamara, but Kamara is going to finish with numbers that in reality are better than most running backs. And he's probably going to miss some time next year due to suspension. I don't know if a team wants to trade for him at that point. And I think you could look at it from this way. Saints can get in a young running back, let them really kind of get their feet under them in the early portion of the regular season. And then guess what? You'll have Kamara back, should be pretty fresh coming off that suspension. And then maybe you have a two-headed monster in the backfield. And that's kind of where you go from there. So that's just me being optimistic, but that's where I'm at. The Browns made worse decisions than us today, and we usually are the best at that week to week. They did. You're right about that. I think the Browns, the one thing they did so weird today was they were very, very stubborn about throwing the football. I mean, if you go back to this, box score, and I got it for my purpose because I don't remember the amount, Watson threw the ball 31 times. That's a lot of times to throw the ball in this weather. It's just very odd to me. Sean is 58, and there's no reason for him to have to rebirth the aging roster with no future QB. Yep, don't see it. If he goes somewhere, it's got to have either a really nice young core or a really nice young quarterback or a lot of draft capital. But it can't be, an aging roster with no draft capital with no cap space. That's just, he left for reasons, The last two wins are making the Tampa meltdown even more frustrating. They actually could have snuck into playoffs. Yep, I agree, man. That's why I want to be frustrated today, but I'm trying to just stay optimistic and be a little bit upbeat because it's a long season and there's 2 weeks left and Christmas is tomorrow. I'm not trying to be a Grinch. So anyway, guys, it wasn't the prettiest of games, but the Saints did win. And technically, their playoff hopes for now stay alive. So 2 weeks left. Again, if you want the Saints to have a best shot of winning out, you're going to want the Eagles to win today. So Gardner Minshew starts next week. But even then, Eagles would still be favored. But it would be a little bit of an easier path, or more manageable, I should say. They'll need to beat the Panthers in the finale. They're also going to need some help along the way. We'll see if they get it. But before I go, guys, I just want to wish you guys a Merry Christmas. And, of course, Happy Holidays for those who aren't celebrating Christmas. I really, really hope you guys enjoy this upcoming Sunday. Enjoy the family time, man. Because next Sunday, we're back to business talking about the Saints. Could be frustrating, could be exciting. Who knows? But for today, it's a little bit of joy, a little bit of a good positive vibe going around. Hope you guys enjoy your Christmas Eve. Enjoy your Sunday. Enjoy your Christmas. And we'll be back here with more content soon on the Straight Up Saints podcast, the destination for the Who Dat Nation.